Welcome to the Hidden History Happy Hour, our first episode in 2024, Alex. Now, I know that's not technically true because our last one aired on January 1st, but for us, it's the first of 24. How are you?
I'm good. Cheers. Good to see you. What are you drinking?
Cheers. I'm enjoying a vodka gimlet for no other reason than I wanted to use my Kraken glass, which I don't know if our viewers can see this, pretty hard to see, but it's got a Kraken, much like our own logo for the podcast.
It's the logo we have. I am drinking, and the cognoscenti will disapprove perhaps of me drinking it from the bottle, but I have found genuine scientific testing. I found this tastes better from the bottle than it does poured into a glass. I'm having Tongolo, which is one of my favorite Belgian beers. One of these days, you and I will go back to Brussels, not in the winter. We've done enough of that. And visit the fine beers of that town. I'll tell you an anecdote about this beer and why I love it so much. I've been drinking this for a while. I was there, I don't know, 2-3 trips ago. It's a sad thing that involves someone else's suffering. I was in a great bar that I know and got a few of these in, watching some football. Belgium was playing Sweden. And it just felt like half time was going on forever. We turned to the landlord and we said, what's going on? I have kind of schoolboy French. One of the guys I was with had really good French. I was with a couple of buddies. And the owner says there's been a terrorist attack. Been a terrorist attack at the stadium or right by the stadium. They didn't, and this guy, there were fatalities. He took lives that night. Wow. And he was targeting Swedish fans. He was targeting, blonde hair, blue eye. And of course, that's not me, but nevertheless, he was targeting people of Western extraction. And of course, the advice in that environment, and he was still on the loose. They didn't let the Belgian fans out until midnight. They didn't let the Swedes out until 3 a.m. And a friend of mine was there at the ground that night. Anyway, the advice in such situations is shelter in place. Well, I was in a bar. And so we basically had a lock-in, and I consumed more of this than I've probably ever done in my life. I, of course, my thoughts were firmly with the victims of that terrible occasion. But I toasted them probably a little too much. We'll go back. You and I will go to that bar one day.
Well, cheers. Yeah. And so when you say it tastes better out of the bottle, wherever you speak, you've done the scientific testing yourself.
Well, it tastes great on draft as well. What I don't care for is pouring it into a bottle, and I don't know why, but for whatever reason, it's bottled and then glass doesn't seem to work the same way for me. I'm sure that's complete myth. I'm sure someone's going to get in touch and say it's actually impossible, but it definitely tastes different to me.
Well, I just think the only responsible thing to do is continue the experiment.
That's true. Do you know what the winner is there? Science. Science is great.
It's all about the science. So everybody, last time when we dropped this episode, our last episode, we got well over 3,000 views. We got well over that, but then the Twitter gods took some of them away from us for some reason. But in any event, season 2 of the Hidden History Happy Hour is rocking along. The viewership and the listenership's going up every couple of weeks, and we really appreciate that. Don't forget to tell everybody about our podcast. Like us, follow us, wherever you get your podcast. This episode, Alex, as you know, is going to be based entirely on the OG lesson from history.
I stand ready.
I don't even have it here because I had it upstairs. Not the cleverly named More Lessons from History. We'll get back to that. And just remember, everybody, my pledge to you on our first episode of season 2 that we will not move to season 3 until we've done the entire oeuvre from both books. And perhaps the next book. No news on that front. I take it out.
No, I'm still writing them, but a little more slowly. I'm a little bit busy on some other things, but I'm still writing. And if people have ideas for stories, please let me know.
I was just thinking, Alex, that as you're taking a little bit of a hiatus from your stories, you could put a sign out on your door like we do in America that says "Gone Fishing" when we want to take some time off. So with that, let's hear a fishing story.
It's a fishing story that I have indirectly from my friend Gavin Esler, who's a TV presenter and a very good journalist here in the UK. We used to do a show called Dateline London together. It was an insightful show. It was cheap TV, and therefore, of course, the BBC axed it. But anyway, it was good television, and we partnered on it for a long time. And we were, I think, the 2 founding members of the King Abdullah of Jordan fan club. And so he and I, Abdullah is far from perfect, but in that region,
as is the BBC, by
amen. But indeed, but Abdullah it was someone we were both interested in, and I read Abdullah's memoirs, and this story is in it. So King Abdullah II of Jordan is a great friend of the West. He is Sandhurst trained, which is a military academy here in the UK, just as his father and his grandfather before him were so trained. And his elite forces from Jordan often participate in tough missions alongside America and the British. And that's why you often see American, British, and Jordanian forces took part in X. And indeed, on some occasions in the past, when he was a younger man, he was not averse to going along with them himself. But of course, before he was king, he was a prince, and his equally famous father, King Hussein, was on the throne. Now, I want to take us back to one occasion in the mid-1980s. And in the course of attempting to both maintain influence and avoid bloodshed in the Middle East, his father visited Iraq to try to talk some sense into Saddam Hussein. Now, Brian, hindsight shows us that was plainly an impossible task, but equally plainly, it's an honorable one, and it's an honorable thing to try. And I must say, too, footnote, this was also pretty broad-minded and pragmatic and duty-oriented of King Hussein, because his first cousin, King Faisal of Iraq, with whom he'd been very close, had been overthrown and brutally executed by the Ba'athist movement that produced Saddam Hussein's coming to power. Anyway,
first of many brutal executions.
Indeed. As a gesture of goodwill, because in this part of the world where monarchs reign, as in mine, it was thought a good idea to train the heir in the art of diplomacy. King Hussein took Abdullah with him to Iraq. He also took Abdullah's brother and two of his cousins. So Abdullah, not unnaturally knowing they're going to go and see Saddam Hussein, says, "Dad, what do you want me to do while you're going to be in conversation with this guy? Because, you know, I'm not really a massive fan." And his father, King Hussein, says, "Well, you'll spend time with his sons, and you'll help to ensure that a positive generation from generation to generation is passed along." Well, not only, of course, did that future not happen for obvious reasons, moreover, Abdullah thought to himself, "Oh, this is going to be great. I've got to spend an afternoon with Uday and Qusay Hussein, two of the world's most famous nutters." So, you know, he gets there and he says, "So, lads," I paraphrase slightly, "So, lads, what are we going to get up to today?" And he was surprised and somewhat relieved to be told, "We're going fishing." And of course said, "Well, look, I didn't bring any kit. And I'm not dressed for it," which backfired, because the clothing is provided for the entire junior generation of the Jordanian entourage, like garish Hawaiian shirts. Don't worry, we thought of this. Here you go. Here's some stuff that we thought was cool because it's the 1980s and we've watched Hawaii Five-0 or whatever. They think, well, look, we'd better stop complaining. It's only fishing. I mean, this could have been a lot worse. So they take a small motorboat on Lake Habaniya. And by the way, that's in Anbar province, which is way west of Baghdad. It needs a flight to get there. So plainly, the Hussein brothers really liked their fishing. Anyway, they're on this small motorboat on the lake, and Abdullah realizes something's missing. Guys, where are the rods? It's like, where are the kits? And from the footwell of the boat, Uday pulls out this big plastic sort of carrier bag, and it's full of dynamite. Lots and lots of dynamite,
like one takes fishing on a boat.
Yeah, like in a cartoon, right? And he lights. He's puffing on a cigar. It was, and in some parts of the world still is, this kind of image of macho kind of leader. He's puffing on this big cigar, and he starts lighting sticks, plural, of dynamite off these cigars. And the first two he lights kind of fizzle, and he says, "Ah, they're duds," and he throws them back into the footwell of the boat. Well. This is not sensible. And Abdullah is sitting next to his cousin Talal. They are both trained to an exceptionally high degree in the military. They know this is one of the stupidest things they've ever seen. They also know they can't say, "What are you doing? You're going to kill us all. We're going to die." So they sit there. They sit there on the boat with their kind of hands gripping the seats, knowing these fuses may well be burning as they roll around under the seats and so forth. They could, I mean, if you tell the Husseins that they don't know what they're doing, you're probably going to be living more dangerously than you are right now, sitting in a boat full of sticks of dynamite rolling around. So they press themselves to the rear of the boat as far as possible, and they kind of cross their fingers. The third stick that the Hussein brothers light stays alight, and it goes over the side, and it goes up in an enormous explosion, which of course must have made our Jordanians think, well, that's what we're due if this carries on. Of course, you think, the serenity of a spot of fishing, how peaceful, how relaxing. Over the side go the servants to gather up dead fish now floating on the surface. Remarkably, and one assumes this wasn't the first time they'd done this stupid act, nobody is killed or even injured in the course of this recreation. And Abdullah and his family returned home to Jordan unscathed. And as we was in the city of London, when you host a state banquet, the formula is that you say at the end, "We hope you take with you many happy memories." Well, obviously, this was the happy memory for them. Dynamite fishing with the Hussein brothers. What an afternoon.
Well, I'm sure they didn't. I'm sure the king did not forget. So in that sense, I guess it was memorable. I love that story, and I wanted you to tell it for a couple of reasons. One is that it's just a great story, but the second one is that my recollection from the run up to the second Iraq War is that Uday and Qusay, if that's how you say it, if I called them psychopaths, I would be insulting psychopaths for a lack of imagination.
Correct. They were amongst the world's truest lunatics. Imagine being told by your dad you've got to spend some leisure time with them, and like you're duty bound.
Yeah, and you probably read their file from Jordanian intelligence, so you know.
Right, and you know exactly what they've been up to, and their idea of fun is to go down into the level -3 in the palace and tear some poor sod's fingernails off. I mean, these were bad guys. Yeah,
the second thing I wanted to say about them is when you were talking about the predicament that the Jordanians found themselves in, and the method that the Saddam Hussein's kids used for fishing reminded me of this old T-shirt I saw back in the 80s. It was a white T-shirt. It was a couple of buzzards sitting up on a high wire looking down at a bunch of deer that were running around, and one of them says, "Patience my ass, I'm going to kill something."
That's about right. That's about right. So it occurs to me, having told I certainly didn't mean to be flippant about it, having told a story about a terrorist attack in Brussels, some of the world's worst despots and their sons, and brutal torture and dynamite, and the story I'm now about to tell, this might be our most fun episode so far.
It's definitely the most fun of 2024, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
One other reason I really wanted you to tell this story, though, Alex, and that is, in my other life, where I cheat on you online, I have encountered a terrifying, and I think a lot of it's deliberate for propaganda purposes, but a lot of it is just ignorance, complete rewriting of history in a number of respects.
Because you're covering the Middle East discussion in a lot of spaces on Twitter now, right, X, aren't you?
Yeah, and hopefully a lot of my people from there are watching this. One of them, the most egregious, is that a huge percentage of people under 30 surveyed in the United States report that either there was no Holocaust at all, or the Jews caused the Holocaust.
You're kidding.
Nope.
Second is even worse than the first.
That's the most terrifying thing. But it's also been stuff like, turns out a lot of kids think bin Laden was a good guy because they posted romantic videos on TikTok.
I saw this wave of bin Laden enthusiasm. Just when you think you've seen it all, you realize you haven't.
And then the one I spent a lot of time debunking online was that the Jews actually did 9/11, that the Mossad actually did 9/11. But in some ways, the most egregious one, not the most horrifying like with the Holocaust, but the most egregious because it is so who cares, is I was on a space talking about something in the Middle East, had absolutely nothing to do with Iraq, or at least ancient Iraq, historical Iraq. And some guy says, well, Saddam never used poison gas on anyone. Yeah. And
He gassed the Kurds en masse.
He
It was
gassed
one
his
of the
own
most,
people. He gassed
yeah.
the Iranians. So like in a 5-second Google search, I pulled up an article from the Wilson Institute, which is a nonpartisan think tank, in which not only did they show the proof, they showed, and I don't know if you may not be old enough. Well, you are. You remember Tariq Aziz, the
Yeah, of
mouthpiece?
course, the mouth of the
Yeah.
prime minister. Yeah.
Yeah. So he famously said during the Iran-Iraq War, for every insect, there is an insecticide. And then
Wow.
actual public statements by Saddam Hussein about him gassing. So it was just immediately debunkable. But my God, to spout that kind of crap and not even bother, first of all, maybe he didn't care because there was some propaganda reason, but
Right.
a lot of people think a lot of not true things about history. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about the Hussein boys.
Yeah, on the not true things, very interesting. I saw a video recently of Vladimir Putin being shown footage of the moon landing, and someone had run an AI search across it that said photos of the moon landing were fake. There's a lot of people running their own photographs of themselves through the same technology that says they are AI created. So you can take a still of you and I talking, and there's a healthy chance that, I mean, I don't know what kind of AI would produce this, but there's a healthy chance that the computer will say that is computer generated.
Yeah, well, and not only that, but if someone ran even one episode of this podcast, even 10 minutes of an episode through even the current generation of AI, they could perfectly fake our voices,
make us say anything.
Episode. Yeah,
yeah, it could save us some time. I'm thinking about.
Yeah. Well, so Alex, I'm told the team in my ear is telling me that fish are not the only things that explode.
Oh yeah. So my second story of the day, and this is, I mean, this is it's kind of that Horrible Histories, which is a series we have here in the UK. We're having a lot of fun with very grisly stories today. This is this is a story on the same vein. Long have we been fascinated by those who spontaneously combust,
like the drummer in Spinal Tap.
Yes, exactly right. And you have no reason to know this, but of course I'm now a successful author, but I've got the occasional sadly failed title that I haven't got away. But I had a sadly never quite written book about spontaneous combustion called People Who Go Pop. And admittedly, the point with spontaneous combustion is that the person concerned is still alive when it happens, rather than the bang coming post-mortem. But I suggest to you that the explosion of the dead is still pretty striking. And I think it's therefore very strange that one of the most famous people in history is not better known to have exploded in death. William the Conqueror, or William the Bastard, depending on your perspective, was the Norman who famously conquered England and the Saxons. Last time my country was successfully invaded, at least in conflict, and is a divisive figure and changed the course of these islands. There was a fully functioning civilization predating the Norman invasion in these islands. Anyway, which lives on in culture and song and folk and certain aspects of law, but the Normans changed this country enormously in 1066, when of course your country wasn't quite on the horizon. Anyway, William the Bastard, William the Conqueror, died after being thrown against the pommel of his saddle whilst riding his horse, but he did not die straight away. The damage done to his internal organs was significant, but he was a while a-dying, and he used the time left, or literally on his deathbed, to split his lands between his children. So he gave Normandy to his firstborn son, Robert. That was supposedly the prize. And he left England to his second surviving son, William Rufus. No sooner can one say primogeniture than this legacy was causing problems amongst those he left behind. And the long-running familial dispute, which led to war between the siblings and their followers, is really what sees so much attention about the death of William the Conqueror. And fairly so. That's the historically important thing about his demise. The fate of nations was swayed by that decision he made on his deathbed to divide his lands. But there is a more immediate and gruesome point to be recalled as well. by some oversight, and interestingly, people used to reuse historic things all the time. So you'll find that a chapel commissioned for somebody that didn't get finished in time is used 100 years later for another monarch. An ornate sarcophagus is designed for one emperor or pharaoh and doesn't get used and is used 100 years later. They were profligate in some ways, but rather efficient in household recycling in others. Anyway, the sarcophagus that was made to receive William's remains was relatively narrow. And William, well, how to put it, after a lifetime of good royal living off the fat of the land in my country, William was not narrow. And after death, the gases within Fat William swelled him up yet more. And you were on the clock, right? The guy's died and he's not going to get any better. And you're going to have to mount a big ceremony for his funeral. So in the Abbey Church at Caen in France, I fear that the efforts to force him into the sarcophagus and nail the lid down rather lacked the lèse-majesté and the dignity expected for a king. And the result certainly did lack the dignity, because there, as everyone is gathered to pay their respects to the great fallen conquering king, boom goes William. The chroniclers of the day try, and I think they struggle to succeed, but they try to convey the stench of days old. They'd have to move William's body, right? The stench of days old putrid gut gases suddenly exposed to the air, and their effect upon the congregation pressed close around the scene. Don't forget, you're closer to God and closer to the action, the further forward you are. Normally, the good seats are really close. Here, being really close was really bad.
Yeah.
No doubt a scene of mourning, but therefore also a scene of the great society of the day. And the presiding clergyman, we are faithfully told, set a new record for the speed of the Latin rites he belts through to complete the ceremony. Because, as you would, if you were assailed with the rotten remains of a king popped directly beneath your nose. So much for the glory of divine right. Side note, in that vein, the philosopher Diogenes was much given to teasing Alexander the Great. And he once told him that he had searched for his celebrated father's remains, but he couldn't distinguish Philip II's bones from those of a slave. I think that's what you call risky banter. As I've diverged, I will indulge myself and diverge once more. I think teasing Alexander the Great was a privilege reserved for the very brave or the very foolish. To his credit, Alexander saw the genius in the idling philosopher. He famously sort of lived in a barrel and most famous for getting on with his dog. And he tolerated this kind of lunatic kind of bum to an extent few would ever have expected. Indeed, one day, taken with the genius of this man, Alexander said to him, "If I were not Alexander, then I would wish to be Diogenes." No greater compliment could Alexander the Great pay to anyone. And Diogenes replied, "If I were not Diogenes, then I too would wish to be Diogenes." Anyway, so William the Conqueror, all conquering, conquers my country, changes 1,000 years of history. We're coming up to 2066 is the blink of an eye away in our historic terms and our purview, and we're still talking about William the Conqueror. But what's the lesson of him exploding in his sarcophagus? We are all mortal, and we all leave this world as we arrived in it, no more and no less than any other. And William's body, I think, shows this base fact perhaps a little sooner and more dramatically than even Diogenes, the bluntest of men, ever even dreamt of pointing out.
Yeah. One of my favorite of your stories. It reminds me of a couple things. One is one of my favorite things about visiting London when my kids were little, which I did, and perhaps you'll be doing that in a couple of years. Well, you'll live in London, but you'll visit the place I'm about to talk about, which is the Tower of London, which is great for many reasons, including that the beefeaters, the docents are very funny. They're very well-trained comedians. But I remember being struck by the exhibit of Henry VIII's armor as he lived his life. And it got
bigger and bigger and bigger.
Just like William.
So Henry VIII founded the university college that I attended, and when I say founded, it's a bit like William the Conqueror came to England and changed it rather than founding a new place. Henry went to Cambridge, found two successful and thriving educational institutions, decided to take them over, incorporate them, whack them together, and name them after, well, the Trinity, but really to the greater glory of Henry VIII. Anyway, so that's a little side note.
Well, and then it did raise an important historical question for me, and that is, does history tell us whether it was the Normans or the Saxons that decided you have a beautiful piece of dinosaur or buffalo or steak that you're getting ready to cook in the UK, and you got
nobody cooked dinosaur,
but you got a nice roaring fire, and you decide to boil a pot of water and throw the meat in the water instead. Was that a Norman or a Saxon thing, do you think?
You know, it's of course the fashionable thing nowadays as a contrarian would be to blame those dreadful Normans for ruining Saxon life, but I'm pretty sure you'll find that on both sides of the channel we've indulged in what you regard as a travesty. That's been a course of action for many people. But yeah, a haunch of beef would quite often be roasted over a spit in the fire. But if you're preserving your food for longer, quite often people would stew. And you remember, refrigeration is a relatively recent, with electricity is a relatively recent phenomenon. People knew how to cool food, of course, and knew how to pickle it and preserve it, but people weren't able to have the same activities that we have on preservation. So what you regard as unattractive in food preparation is a sin of both cultures.
Yeah, and also two things can be true at the same time. It might be terrible, but also necessary at one point in history. The other thing this reminded me of is the indignity of the way that William went out. Reminded me of Elvis Presley, who famously
hamburgers on the toilet.
Yeah, they had to remove him from his toilet with the jaws of life, so the story goes. I don't know if that's actually true, but I would not have wanted to been the paramedics who had to do that work regardless. And the last thing, and I think this is going to be a nice little crisp episode, which people enjoy every now and again, is that keeping with the parade of grisliness that we're doing on today's show, and reminding myself of what was that Leatherface guy in your hometown?
Yeah. You were talking about this is
and you guys, school kids had to go
William Cawdor. Sorry.
Yeah. Another William
Cawdor. Yeah.
So I came across something that's at least equally grisly, and also does a callback to our your Release the Bees story that we've now done twice. And that is, apparently the Persians, I think this is the Persians, if I'm wrong, Persians don't sue me, but an ancient culture, let's say that, had a method of torturous execution, which is even more horribly creative than most of the others I've heard of over the years. They would take the person, the human that they wanted to execute, and they would sew the person into a very heavy bag with a bunch of small wild animals, and then, just to make sure they wouldn't take any chances, throw it into the sea.
So the Persians may have done that. The Romans definitely did.
Okay,
the Romans would put people in the Tiber with in a bag with animals, but actually, there's no guarantee that's going to work. I mean, the person may emerge the worse for wear, but certainly if the animal's got claws, you can foresee chances of it working out in their favor, but unlikely.
Well, maybe that was actually considered a less brutal way of killing someone, because at least you had a tiny little chance that you or the animals would claw your way out of the bag.
Well, you didn't kill them, right? You didn't take their life. If there's a religious objection to taking life, you hadn't done that. Their death may have resulted from the punishment that was meted out to them, but you didn't directly take their life.
Yeah, I don't know if the Romans were so religious, but yes, that's also
the Romans were definitely religious in like 50 different ways. I don't think that any of those requirements actually prevented them from taking life. I was just kind of spitballing, but the Romans.
I guess what I meant is sanctity of life was not a thing.
No, that's definitely true. That's definitely true.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, Alex has a big event in his life coming up. The next time you see us, it may have already happened. And we wish you the best, Alex. We wish your lovely bride the best. and we'll see
I
you next
appreciate it.
time.
See you next time. Cheers.
Cheers.